We don't even realize how intelligent dogs are. They sometimes understand us better than our loved ones, and even better than ourselves. And when it comes to the safety of their owners, they are ready to give their lives to protect their loved ones. The gavel struck sharply against the wooden desk, its echo reverberating throughout the packed courtroom in Portland, Oregon. The conditioned air hummed steadily, providing a faint undercurrent to the tension gripping the room. All eyes were fixated on the small girl standing near the front, clutching the leash of her German shepherd, Max, tightly in her tiny hands. Her parents, Kate and Tom, flanked her protectively, their faces etched with worry and exhaustion. The faint scent of coffee drifted from the jury box as several jurors sipped from mugs, their nervous tapping adding subtle percussion to the atmosphere. 5-year-old Emma Clark looked impossibly small amidst the towering legal formalities that surrounded her. Diagnosed with epilepsy, her life was bound to her loyal service dog, Max, who sat at her feet, occasionally glancing up at her. His ears twitched, and his glossy coat bristled imperceptibly as his intense eyes locked on the defendant. Max was trained to detect the warning signs of Emma's seizures, but today, his unease seemed directed at Richard Vance, the man accused of attempting to abduct her 2 weeks ago. The defendant sat rigidly at the defense table, his sharp features twisted into a studied calm. Vance, a man in his 40s with graying hair and a thin smile, exuded an air of self-assurance that felt almost unnerving. "Order," Judge Gilmore commanded, her voice cutting through the murmurs of the gallery. She adjusted her glasses and peered down at her notes, her expression impartial yet coldly efficient. Gilmore was known for her strict adherence to evidence, and despite the accusations against Vance, the case presented thus far appeared to favor the defendant. Beside her, Prosecutor Andrew Lane rose to speak, his tone urgent yet measured. "Your Honor, we are here today to determine whether Mr. Vance unlawfully attempted to abduct Emma Clark from a local park. We believe the evidence, including eyewitness testimony and behavioral indicators, points conclusively to his guilt." The defense attorney, Patricia Hollis, smirked subtly before responding. "Your Honor, the defense maintains that Mr. Vance was at home during the time in question, a fact corroborated by multiple witnesses. Any suggestion to the contrary is based purely on speculation." Max shifted uneasily, letting out a low whine. The sound drew a few curious glances from the gallery but was quickly dismissed. The judge's gavel struck again, silencing the faint noise of whispers that had begun to grow. Kate Clark tightened her grip on Emma's shoulders as she whispered soothingly to the girl. Tom stood stoic, his knuckles white as he gripped the courtroom railing. Their strained expressions mirrored the helplessness of parents desperate to protect their child from harm. As the proceedings continued, the defense called several witnesses to the stand. Among them were neighbors who testified that they had seen Vance at home during the alleged time of the incident. One elderly man leaned forward, his voice confident yet dry. "I saw Richard at his house that evening, watering the garden. He couldn't have been in the park." Max's ears twitched sharply at the testimony, and his entire posture changed. His muscles tensed, his tail stiffened, and his piercing gaze locked onto Vance. A low growl emanated from deep within the dog's throat, so quiet that only those nearby could hear. Kate murmured something to Emma in an attempt to soothe her, while Tom gave Max's leash a gentle tug. The dog reluctantly settled, but his gaze never wavered. Judge Gilmore paused, her gaze flickering briefly toward Max before returning to the witness. "Thank you for your statement," she said curtly, before nodding to the defense to proceed. But the tension in the room seemed to thicken with every passing moment. Max's behavior, subtle yet insistent, began to draw glances from the jury, who exchanged uncertain whispers behind their hands. Though no explicit evidence had yet linked Vance to the crime, the dog's continued fixation on him felt like an unspoken challenge to the narrative being crafted. As the testimonies concluded for the day, Kate and Tom gathered their daughter and her service dog, preparing to leave the courtroom. Max gave one last low growl in Vance's direction, his hackles raised ever so slightly, a silent declaration that the story was far from over. The tension in the courtroom deepened as the proceedings continued. Following the initial round of testimonies, the witness testimony from several neighbors had cast doubt on the prosecution's version of events. As an elderly neighbor began recounting that he had seen Richard Vance at home during the time of the alleged abduction, the atmosphere was already charged with skeptical murmurs. In that moment, the focus of the room shifted subtly, but not unnoticed, to Max, Emma's faithful German shepherd and service dog. Max, who had been sitting quietly at Emma's feet until now, suddenly stiffened. His eyes narrowed and his ears pricked forward as he turned his gaze steadily toward Richard Vance, who sat at the defense table looking unusually calm given the accusations against him. Then, without warning, Max let out a sharp, low growl that resonated across the hushed room. The sound cut through the steady drone of quiet whispers and the occasional shuffle of paper. A few nearby jurors glanced nervously at one another, and even some of the skeptical onlookers shifted in their seats. Richard Vance's composed mask faltered for a fleeting moment as Max's growl grew in intensity. The defense attorney at Vance's side attempted to smooth over the disruption with an anxious comment, but it was clear that Max's behavior was not a random act. It was deliberate, almost as if the dog had received a secret signal that pointed directly at Vance. At that, a ripple of murmurs spread among the gallery. Several journalists in the press box began filming as Max barked again. Louder this time, a series of short, insistent barks interspersed with low, threatening growling. The dog's fur stood on end, and he tugged insistently on his leash in Emma's small hand, his entire frame radiating agitation. Emma herself looked confused and scared. She could not understand why her faithful companion was so animated toward the man sitting silently in the defendant's chair. The defense counsel for Richard Vance leaned forward, a frown creasing his brow. "Objection," he snapped to the prosecutor. "That is nothing more than an instinctive reaction from a dog. It is not evidence of anything beyond animal behavior." Prosecutor Andrew Lane, however, was quick to seize the moment. "Your Honor," he interjected with a measured tone that brooked no argument. "This is not a mere quirk, but a clear defensive response by a trained service animal. Veterinary records and training manuals confirm that a dog's acute sense of smell and behavior can detect subtle cues of deceit or danger. Given that Emma relies on Max for assistance due to her medical condition, his demonstrated alarm should not be dismissed lightly." Judge Ronald Davis regarded the exchange, his face impassive as he considered the competing assertions. The room buzzed softly with speculation as the judge's piercing eyes moved from the attorneys to the dog, a silent sentinel whose behavior had now become the unexpected focal point of the trial. At that crucial juncture, the defense for Richard Vance abruptly rose. "We request that this disruptive dog be removed from the courtroom," the defense attorney demanded, his voice rising in urgency. "Max's behavior is interfering with the proceedings, creating an undue emotional influence on the jurors." A commotion stirred among the gallery. Kate and Tom Clark, Emma's parents, exchanged worried glances, their faces etched with distress. The idea of removing Max was unthinkable to them. He was not only Emma's support for her epilepsy but also a silent guardian whose behavior was beginning to speak volumes in favor of their daughter's truth. Prosecutor Lane quickly countered. "Your Honor, I must insist that Max remain with Emma at all times during these proceedings. His presence is not only medically necessary, as documented by her doctor, but also critical for her emotional stability. Removing him would subject this vulnerable child to further distress and potentially jeopardize her testimony." Judge Davis frowned, weighing the arguments in a measured silence. Finally, he nodded. "Very well. The dog shall remain under close observation." His tone, though firm, hinted at an inner conflict as he addressed both sides. "However, any behavior that is unduly disruptive may result in appropriate measures, as this is not a matter of mere inconvenience." The court settled back into a tense quiet as the proceedings resumed. Soon, the judge called on a witness to testify further about that fateful day in the park. As the neighbors recounted details of the incident, the room's attention steadily gravitated toward Emma. The prosecution prepared to call her to the stand, aiming to have her describe what had happened in the dark hours of that fateful night. Though nervous, Emma's innocent confidence and the protective presence of Max lent her a solemn gravity. Just as the witness testimonies wound down, Judge Davis raised his hand. "Mr. Lane, if no further evidence is forthcoming, we shall call the next witness." With that, the room shifted its focus. Emma's small figure was soon called upon to step forward to the witness stand, guided gently by her parents. As she made her way slowly, Max lingering by her heels, his eyes darting sharply toward Richard Vance. The tension in the air reached a fever pitch. The stage was now set for a young girl's testimony that could prove pivotal, and Max's seemingly preternatural behavior continued to whisper secrets of what had really transpired that night. The courtroom's atmosphere was taut with anticipation as Judge Gilmore signaled for the next witness. Soon, a timid voice echoed from the witness stand. Young Emma Clark. Guided gently by her parents, Kate and Tom, Emma climbed the steps with Max trotting anxiously by her side. The little girl's wide eyes fixed on the judge, and, with innocent determination, she began to recount her memory of that fateful night in the park. "Ma'am," asked Judge Gilmore kindly, "can you tell us who was with you in the park that night?" Emma's small voice wavered slightly but grew steadier as she spoke. I was with my service dog, Max, and I saw someone. I saw a man." Her eyes flicked towards the defendant, Richard Vance, who sat at the defense table with an expression that fluctuated between feigned calm and underlying apprehension. "I remember him very clearly. He was there, standing near the lamp post, and I felt scared." At that moment, a murmur rose from within the courtroom. Witnesses shifted in their seats, and even a few reporters leaned forward in anticipation. The prosecuting attorney, with a raised eyebrow, interjected, "Ms. Clark, are you absolutely sure? You're very young. Your memory might be a bit confused." Emma's gaze did not waver. With the clarity of a child who knew she was telling the truth, she repeated, "I know what I saw. My dog didn't like him. Max barked and growled at him." At this mention, all eyes turned to Max, poised by Emma's side. The dog's usual calm was replaced by an alert intensity. His ears perked up, and his tail stiffened. The tension was palpable as Max's eyes fixed on Vance with a look that seemed to pierce through the man's carefully maintained facade. A low, almost imperceptible rumble emanated from Max, a sound that, in the charged silence of the courtroom, was laden with meaning. Suddenly, Richard Vance's defense attorney leaped into action. "Objection!" he barked sharply. "Such an account by a 5-year-old is utterly unreliable and clearly a product of imagination." His tone was dismissive, as if Emma's testimony could be easily disregarded due to her age. Prosecutor Andrew Lane took a step forward. "Your Honor, with all due respect, young Emma's testimony is supported by the extraordinary behavior of her service dog. Max's reaction is not random. Trained animals can detect much more than we give them credit for." His barking and aggressive stance toward Mr. Vance clearly indicate that the child's fear was well-founded. Meanwhile, Judge Gilmore's gaze shifted between Emma, who clutched her mother's hand tightly, and Max, whose eyes now tracked Vance with even greater intensity. The silence grew heavy as the defense's arguments attempted to undermine the credibility of the testimony. Yet, Emma's simple, unwavering recollection of a man who frightened her, and Max's clear distress, began to erode the foundation of the opposing narrative. The tension in the room rose steadily. Every detail, the slight tremor in Emma's voice as she repeated the description, the steady, almost accusatory glares from Max, the quiet but persistent shuffling of papers, concentrated on this pivotal moment. Judge Gilmore leaned forward, her eyes softening as she addressed the young witness gently. "Thank you, Emma. That is very brave of you." Just then, an unexpected twist shattered the room's controlled tension. As Emma finished confirming that she had seen Mr. Vance and that Max had barked at him, Max's blatant agitation escalated. His low growl, which had occupied the background moments earlier, deepened and turned into a series of sharp, insistent barks. Without any apparent trigger from Emma, Max suddenly tugged hard on his leash. In a split second that seemed to stretch time, the dog broke free from Tom's grasp and bolted toward the open courtroom doors. A shockwave rippled through the seated audience. Gasps, murmurs, and the sudden clatter of chairs filled the void left by Max's abrupt escape. Richard Vance's face contorted, a mixture of anger and panic fleeting across his features. The defense's hasty protests were drowned by the sound of scrambling footsteps and a reporter's exclamation. Through the disarray, Emma's eyes glistened with confusion and silent fear, while her parents instinctively stood to follow Max. Judge Gilmore quickly called for order as the commotion grew. "Order! Please, remain seated," she demanded, her voice firm yet carrying an undercurrent of urgency. Amid the chaos, the recording devices in the room continued to capture every moment, a moment that would soon serve as undeniable evidence. As murmurs began to resettle, the courtroom buzzed with a mix of shock and anticipation. The unexpected reaction of Max, his sudden burst of agitation and subsequent escape, had added a new, critical dimension to the case. It now appeared that something in Richard Vance's very presence had triggered the instincts of a specially trained service dog, a fact that lent further credence to Emma's testimony. In the midst of the unfolding drama, Judge Gilmore signaled a brief recess to allow order to be restored. But even as the proceedings were paused, the murmurs among the jurors and the tense glances exchanged between reporters indicated that this pivotal moment had shifted the entire courtroom dynamic. The fate of Richard Vance, along with the integrity of the case, now hung in even starker balance than before. After a brief recess, the courtroom resumed, and the tension hung as thick as the mid-afternoon heat in Portland. The atmosphere, already charged with anxious expectation, was suddenly pierced by a commotion at the entrance. Almost as if on cue, Max, the trusted German shepherd and service dog of young Emma Clark, barked sharply and bolted out the opened courtroom doors. A few seconds later, the door swung open, and to everyone's astonishment, Max trotted back inside. Clutched gently in his mouth was a small, dirty pink t-shirt. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the bailiff stepped forward and announced, "Exhibit E." The pink t-shirt found in the corridor. The t-shirt, creased and stained with dried crimson specks, was immediately passed to Judge Ronald Davis. The magnified image projected on the screen captured every detail: the faded fabric, the telltale bloodstains that starkly contrasted with the soft pink background, and tiny fibers that hinted at its owner's recent contact with something traumatic. In a trembling yet resolute voice, Kate Clark, Emma's mother, hurried to confirm, "That's Emma's t-shirt. She wore it on the day of the incident in the park. It's her favorite." Tom Clark nodded solemnly beside her, his eyes filled with equal parts anguish and determination. The evidence on the screen was undeniable. Every juror, reporter, and spectator seemed transfixed by the sight of the garment. It was no ordinary piece of clothing. It was a tangible link to the night when Emma was left in danger, and when the true events of that night might finally be revealed. A chill fell over the courtroom as Judge Davis, his voice measured and grave, announced, "I hereby order a recess of 24 hours to perform a full forensic analysis on this exhibit. The origin of the bloodstains must be determined with precision, as it is critical to the integrity of this case." His gavel hit the desk with a definitive thud, punctuating the gravity of his words. The room broke into subdued murmurs as the weight of the revelation settled in. Max, usually the picture of calm loyalty, sat quietly by Emma's side now, his eyes flitting between the evidence and the defendant, Richard Vance, whose previously composed expression showed signs of faltering under the new development. Reporters scribbled fervently in their notepads, and even a few jurors exchanged uneasy glances, as the possibility of a breakthrough in the case stirred excitement and dread in equal measure. The prosecuting attorney, Nathan Green, attempted to protest the delay, but his objections were swallowed by the collective sense that this evidence might turn the entire case on its head. As Judge Davis's order for a 24-hour recess echoed in the silent courtroom, the air seemed to quiver with anticipation. The promise of scientific analysis to finally unveil the truth about the pink t-shirt had everyone holding their breath. That very moment, a mosaic of hope, uncertainty, and quiet defiance filled the room. a feeling that the final verdict, when it came, would alter the course of this case and resound far beyond these walls. After the 24-hour recess, the courtroom buzzed with renewed tension and anxious expectation as the forensic report for Exhibit E, the pink T-shirt clutched by Max on his return, was finally announced. The once hushed atmosphere was now punctuated by the low hum of whispered conversations and the intermittent scratch of pens as reporters and jurors alike awaited the details of the analysis. A forensic expert, clad in a crisp lab coat and wearing protective gloves, stepped forward to address the court. His measured tone cut through the anticipation. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, after a thorough analysis of the bloodstains on the pink T-shirt, "I can confirm that the DNA sample matches that of Richard Vance, the defendant in this case." The room seemed to hold its breath at his words. A ripple of shock passed among the jurors and even the bank attorneys in the back, their earlier smug expressions now replaced by unease. Judge Ronald Davis's eyes narrowed as he listened intently. "Mr. Harris," he said, turning toward Leah, "these forensic results are critical. They unequivocally tie the physical evidence recovered from the scene, the T-shirt, to Mr. Vance." His voice, steady and authoritative, reverberated off the courtroom's polished wood surfaces. A brief silence descended as Prosecutor Andrew Lane and the defense remained motionless. For a moment, no one spoke. Nathan Green's earlier verbal jabs were muted in the face of irrefutable scientific data. The silence from the defense was especially telling. Not a single objection was raised. The evidence stood alone, formidable and unassailable. Leah took a measured step forward, her calm gaze sweeping over the courtroom, absorbing the gravity of the revelation. "Your Honor," she intoned, "this evidence substantiates my claim. I have been framed by a series of collusions designed to shift blame. The DNA analysis confirms that the blood found on the garment belongs solely to Mr. Vance, which directly contradicts his claim of innocence and his purported alibi." Her voice, though soft, resonated powerfully within the charged atmosphere. Judge Davis tapped his gavel lightly, the rhythmic sound cutting through the heavy silence. "I have taken note of this evidence with the utmost seriousness," he declared. "Given these findings, I am now prepared to enter a final review of the charges against Mr. Vance. The defense has presented strong evidence of misdirection and deliberate cover-up." His gaze swept over the courtroom, lingering momentarily on the shard of disbelief in Vance's eyes. In that moment, a wave of murmurs and shuffling rippled softly among the spectators. Every pair of eyes was fixed on the judge as he meticulously organized his thoughts. The prosecuting team, now quiet and visibly rattled by the results, could only watch as their case began to unravel. Leah's measured confidence radiated throughout, her quiet defiance bolstered by the incontrovertible facts laid out before them. Outside, through the tall, narrow windows of the courtroom, the overcast Portland morning peeked in, a silent, gray witness to what was happening within these walls. The restrained energy of the room mingled with the scent of polished wood and the distant murmur of hushed voices, heightening the drama of the moment. Judge Davis cleared his throat, signaling that he was ready to proceed with his final deliberations. "I will now adjourn the session temporarily to review all of the evidence, including the DNA findings, and prepare for final arguments," he announced gravely. The gavel came down once more, its resonant tone marking the beginning of what everyone understood would be a crucial turning point. As the courtroom slowly emptied for the recess, the impact of the forensic results lingered in every murmur, and the thoughtful silence etched on the faces of jurors and spectators alike. The truth had, for a moment, demanded that even the most dubious claims be re-examined. All eyes turned toward the closed doors, waiting, anticipating the final reckoning that loomed just beyond the recess, the final verdict that would decide the fate of Richard Vance. After a long, grueling day filled with anxious whispers and measured deliberations, the courtroom's atmosphere in Portland reached its climax. The room, still humming with the subdued buzz of the air conditioner and the lingering aroma of stale coffee from the jury box, was now shrouded in a profound silence. All eyes, those of the jurors, reporters, and even a few onlookers, were fixed on Judge Gilmore as she prepared to deliver her final verdict. Judge Gilmore, Her expression, hard yet resolute, cleared her throat. The polished wood of her bench glistened under the harsh fluorescent lights as she adjusted her glasses, looking directly at the defendant. After thoroughly reviewing the evidence presented, from the surveillance photographs to the detailed cybersecurity report, and, most critically, the forensic analysis of the pink t-shirt, this court is compelled to reach a decision that upholds the truth. Her measured tone, imbued with authority, reverberated throughout the silent room. A tense moment passed before she continued. The forensic evidence, which demonstrates without a shadow of a doubt that the DNA found on the garment matches that of Richard Vance, decisively undermines the defense's assertions that Mr. Vance was not present during the incident. Furthermore, the testimony provided by Emma Clark, a testimony as innocent as it is powerful, coupled with the unwavering reaction of her service dog, Max, leaves no room for reasonable doubt. At this, a ripple of audible shock passed through the courtroom. Richard Vance's confident facade crumbled visibly. His face drained to a pallid expression, and his hands, which had trembled ever so slightly earlier, now fumbled with the edge of his suit jacket. Prosecutor Andrew Lane and the bank-appointed attorneys sat silently, their earlier arrogance replaced by a mixture of disbelief and apprehension. Judge Gilmore's gaze swept across the gallery. In light of these incontrovertible facts and the overwhelming evidence illustrating not only a grave breach of consumer protection, but also a deliberate cover-up by the financial institution involved, I hereby find Richard Vance guilty of attempted abduction and credit card fraud. The judge's voice rang out clearly, punctuated by the decisive strike of her gavel. A stunned silence followed before the room erupted into a tumultuous mix of hushed murmurs and then, gradually, earnest applause. Some jurors clapped softly at first, then louder. Reporters scribbled fervently in their notebooks, and a few onlookers exchanged glances of vindication. In the front row, Emma Clark's small face lit up with a mixture of relief and a newfound understanding as her parents, Kate and Tom, clutched each other, their eyes glistening with quiet joy and lingering worry, while Max sat attentively at Emma's side, his posture noble and resolute. Judge Gilmore's gavel came down with a resounding finality as she pronounced, "The defendant is hereby sentenced to 15 years of imprisonment. Furthermore, I order that an independent investigation be launched into the bank's handling of the breach, as this matter raises serious questions about corporate accountability." A heavy murmur rippled through the courtroom as the weight of the verdict sank in. Richard Vance, now visibly shaken and defeated, avoided eye contact with anyone in the room. His brief, arrogant smiles had long since evaporated, replaced by a grim submission to the gravity of his actions revealed by the evidence. The atmosphere, once saturated with skepticism and derision toward little Emma's testimony and her loyal companion Max, had transformed completely. Spectators, jurors, and reporters alike were united in astonishment and relief, their collective approval manifested in sustained applause and whispered congratulations. As the courtroom began to empty, the enduring silence was slowly replaced by the buzz of excitement and relief. Every detail, the soft shuffle of papers, the quiet clink of pens, and even the subdued hum of the air conditioner, seemed to capture a profound shift in justice. Emma, guided gently by her parents, was led away with Max trotting faithfully by her side, his eyes shining with a gentle pride as if affirming that even the smallest voices can echo loudly in the pursuit of truth. Richard Vance's downfall and the dramatic vindication of a wronged child had now set off ripples far beyond these walls. The case, now a local legend, promised to inspire many others to stand up against injustice and to demand accountability from those in power. What do you think is the most powerful lesson from Emma's courageous testimony and Max's silent stand for truth in the courtroom? Have you ever witnessed a moment where unexpected evidence turned the tide against overwhelming odds? Write your opinion in the comments. We'd love to hear your perspective. I hope you enjoyed this story. Leave a comment, sharing your thoughts about it. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new and equally exciting stories. See you in the next video.